Hello, everyone, and welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm your host, Jeane Slone. I have written 3 historical fictions, She Flew Bombers, She Built Ships, and the newly published She Was an American Spy During World War II. Today in our studio, I would like to welcome Tosca Lenci. Thanks for joining us in WriterSpeak, Tosca.
I'm extremely happy to be here. You know, this is my 3rd time, and I've loved every moment of it.
Well, we have 3 of your books. You are such a prolific writer.
I was.
And I'm very excited to introduce 3 books. We'll concentrate on one book at a time.
Okay.
Here's one of the last books, and it's titled Journey with JC. This was very interesting for me to read. It does bring you on a journey.
Yes, it does.
And mostly in Mexico and California.
It was a midlife journey. My husband and I were married 25 years, divorced for 12 and remarried for 17, and this begins at the time of the divorce.
And that is so unusual. I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
That it begins at the time of the divorce?
Well, that's of interest, but there's not that many people that get married, stay married for a long period of time.
25 years.
Then get divorced for a period of 12 years, and then remarry that person again.
Oh, I am so glad that we were able to do that, because he and I were, we were naturals. We met in college, but he was a senior. I had struggled, daughter of immigrants and all of that. A lot of that's told in, retrospect, in flashbacks. But I had struggled so hard. I was out of high school at 16 and went to work as in an insurance company in San Francisco, which was expected because of our culture and so forth and being female. My older sister had done that, had gone to, and contributed to the household afterwards. And I got a job and everyone thought that was great. And I remember, typing these insurance policies, but I always wanted to study and I loved to read. And so I talked to my dad and he said, well, yes, you can live at home if you want. And I had to go to JC to make up all these things I hadn't had. So I was in my 2nd semester at State in the 2nd year when I got into my goal, creative writing course. And sitting there in the row ahead of me is my husband-to-be. And by the time I was 19 and a couple of months, we were married. I was a working mother, had a baby. He was a graduate student in philosophy. And so
that so fits that he was into philosophy, because most of your books are extremely philosophical.
There is some of that in there, but psychology was really my main interest besides writing. But so anyway, what happened was we got burdened, a lot of poverty at first and so forth. So, there was all of that that's required. You're married, then there was his career development, there were our children, and I made a conscious decision. I was not going to let my desire to write keep me from having a normal life, because I was familiar enough with so many writers that we love, long gone, who lost anything, who lost their real lives because they were driven to write and they had to answer that. So I didn't start really until both of my daughters were, one of them was in college, and I remember setting a desk up in the bedroom and thinking, now I'm going to write. So my husband and I did not have the time to develop those 2 natures to the full degree that had met so well so long before. So I was so grateful for the 17 later years, because then And this tells that story, of course, of the remarriage too.
And so why don't you tell us about, so there was a 12-year gap.
Right.
But you did still see each other because you had 2 children together.
We saw each other probably a total of maybe 5 times during those 12 years. He remarried. And the curious thing is that I was working then in a city office for the city council, and I came in early. I had a dream one night. I had tried to go back to school, and I had taken a course in the psychology of perception, because you know that other trilogy that we did before, I was so interested in perception. Well, I was using my maiden name, which had been restored to me in the divorce, but it was at the college where my husband taught. And he didn't know I was doing this, but for some reason, the professor turned against me, and I couldn't figure out what was going on until I realized I had used my maiden name by my married name on the 3rd Blue Book. I was doing fine up until then. But I didn't put it together. It's just that he wouldn't see me. He wouldn't talk to me. I called him at home one night. I got him at home, and he said I should examine my reasons for taking the course. I almost went nuts, so I just dropped out. Well, here I am, I don't know, 5 years later or whatever, and I wake up one morning and this thought's in my mind and says, you should write Ron and tell him about what happened with you and Mr. X. So I was like a robot, and I went to the library. I went to the office, and I rolled in a piece of paper. I was there early, and I wrote to my husband. I said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I had this dream that told me I should let you know what happened to me when I tried to take this course. Well, he called me right away and explained what had happened between he and this other professor. Apparently, the other professor thought I was there as a spy or something for my husband. But anyway, they had not gotten along. They had been forced to do a interdisciplinary teaching, and it was like oil and water.
So it really had nothing to do with you.
Had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And so, but the curious thing is that I didn't know it, but my husband was in the process of getting a divorce. And so, as soon as he called me right away to explain it, and as soon as that happened, then he started, calling me. I even changed my phone number because he would call me after work just wanting to talk, and I didn't want to talk, but eventually we did remarry.
You were pursued. Once again.
But you do know that during those 12 years, I did a lot of exploration of male-female relationships. So.
And before we talk about Journey with, or before we talk more about Journey with JC, I'd like to talk a little bit about your artwork, that you made this lovely painting. And of all your books, you painted the covers of all your books.
Yes.
Could you tell the audience your how you came to paint?
Well, I loved to draw. I loved art when I was a child, but didn't do much of it until my husband, as you know, was a philosopher, and a common joke about philosophers was one that was in the New Yorker, where a woman is answering the door to a friend, and you can see the husband in the living room sitting in a big easy chair, and she's saying, the trouble with philosophers is you never know when they're working. And so he was very sedentary. Mm-hmm. He used to lift weights and stuff, but for the most part he was sedentary. And we would go places, and if we went on a vacation or whatever. And so I was always a hand person. So that's when I started drawing and painting. And then during the divorce years, I got to do more of it, a lot of these are just sketches or pen and ink or something.
So this one is pen and ink?
Yeah, this one is pastel. I've done all media.
Oh, okay, that's what
media.
I wanted to know.
Yeah.
The oil, you've done oil?
I've done oil, and I've done acrylic. And I did a lot of things. I gave away. I've done. I did watercolors way back, but you know, you try a media and then you realize each one is a lifetime to really do it. So I'm not, you know, I'm a folk artist, I guess.
Oh, I see.
I'm not a, you know, professional. I haven't had training or anything.
It seemed like it to me. Of course, I'm just got buried in. I never developed past stick figures, so I admire art because I don't have that ability. But what is your favorite medium to paint with? Is it pen and ink or oil or watercolor? Do you have a favorite?
I think my favorite probably was oil. And I haven't done it in recent years.
And that's the hardest.
Mainly, the colored things are mainly either acrylic. Like these, some of these were done, the pastels were done back in the 80s. I mean, these, you know, they're about some 30, 40 years of collection of stuff.
Well, what talent that you worked in all those mediums. I'm impressed.
Oh, thank you.
Was this book, Journey with JC, it was all very enjoyable to me. The end, when he was passing away, you were able to write so well that it was painful.
I know.
Yeah, and sad. So you evoked those emotions very well. And when did you write about his death? How long did it take you?
It was, he died. The curious thing is that the day that we separated from the first marriage, and literally physically separated, was Valentine's Day.
Oh, I remember you writing that.
And so he passed away on Valentine's Day. And that was, it was several months, maybe 6 months afterwards, that I started, you know, looking at notes I'd made during the waiting and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to take some notes. The details are great.
Yeah.
In the book, and it talks a lot about hospital procedures and things you're told, and then you're told, no, that's not what's wrong. And I mean, it almost read like a hospital drama that you're watching on TV. I mean, not playing it down, but it seemed very real to me.
Yes, it was very real.
I mean, the writing made it very real.
Well, I don't know. Who knows why we're driven to do these things? You know, you're born to be a writer. I remember when I was a kid, it has something to do with I don't know. I just read an article about new discoveries in the brain. There must be something genetic or hereditary about it all. I don't know. But I remember I used to think in third person, you know. I mean, that's how I kept my mind busy. If I was walking from home to school or home to church or wherever I'd be, my mind would be saying, well, she walked, you know, she this, and she saw that, and that's what I was used to do.
And, you know, I didn't start doing that until I started writing.
Oh, you did start doing that?
Only when I started writing.
Well,
that's very fascinating. Thinking in third person. It was not something I ever did until I thought I'd better start doing that in order to write.
I wonder if it wasn't a defense of some kind too, because there was, you know, the first 5 or 6 years of our lives are the most determinant, I think, for our nature, and that's where we remember the least. But I'd have this feeling that my life went as a toddler from when my father took very ill and couldn't work. And we went from, I do remember, we lived in a flat, you know, in San Francisco. He was a butcher. My mom was always a stay-at-home. But I think that I was content. My dad, I think, had interaction with me and was cheerful and so forth because his basic nature was cheerful. But then he went into this horrible decline when he became very ill and couldn't work, and we had to move and live in the basement of his sister's, the home of one of his sisters. And I think that did something to me at the time. You know, it was like probably a shock, a change in environment and you know, the whole thing.
Yeah,
and so maybe
everything.
that third person thinking was a defense. I don't know.
I'm sure our audience would love to hear you read from Journey with JC.
Okay. Well, here's a little part during the second marriage. And when I remarried my husband, he expected me to be what I'd been before. And, you know, I'd always focused on the domestic wife, career builder thing. And I warned him, I'd had those 12 years and I'd been writing, but he didn't realize it. I know we hadn't been more than a couple of weeks because I made this vow. I was not going to accept things I'd accepted before. Like if he came out and made a sandwich and dropped mustard on the floor and didn't pick it up and I came out and stepped on it, I was going to say something. So he'd gone through maybe a month or two of this, new Tosca, right? When I remember he was sitting in the living room one day and he said, I think I made a big mistake. I mean, I knew he was kind of kidding. But anyway, I separated from him once. We were living together, of course, but I went into another room because we'd had this disagreement. And I can't even really remember what it is now, but anyway, it was enough for me to feel I had to make a case. So this is during that. At 5 p.m., I reemerged, my handsomest outfit over my arm, to enter the bathroom to use the tub. J.C. looked up as I passed his chair. I thought I'd go out to dinner tonight, I said. Would you like to come? He didn't answer right away. He walked past me into the living room first. That sounds okay to me, his words finally drifted back. When I came out, matronly fashionable in aqua blue and gold, he had spiffied up and was wearing his dressy leather jacket. We had a leisurely dinner in town and spent an hour in the bookstore, and he waited patiently while I went through practically every book on the Eastern philosophy shelf. Returning home, we sat and talked congenially for about an hour, at which point I said, well, I'm going to bed now. I was half undressed when he entered the studio room without knocking. I held my blouse up in front of my brassiere. Oh, sorry, he backed out into the adjoining room and then said through the crack in the door, I'm confused. Why are you confused? Because I gave you a goodnight kiss? Well, yes. And you thought that meant something more? Oh, well, I don't know. Well, yes, I guess so. I mean, you did say you might consider it, in quotes, for a price. He was referring to an earlier jest of mine. How much? I queried. Let's see, $2? $2? The kiss was worth at least 5 times that. But I wasn't able to keep from laughing. And just because I'm laughing doesn't mean everything's all right. Oh, no, I understand. It's okay. But tell me, when will we make love again? Not until I've printed out the final draft of Beloved Disciple. Okay, now that we've established what you are, he said, playing with another old joke, we still need to establish the price. $100 should do it. $100? I'm worth it, I said. Besides, twice a month and my rent's paid.
All right, that part is so funny. You just really captured yourself and him in this book, and I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to tell you that interspersed throughout the book, or mainly, I think in the beginning, you talk a lot about orgasm.
Absolutely.
And I'm not, I mean, it's up to you whether you want to talk about it or not. But I just
No,
wanted
because it
to,
says right on the cover,
yes,
orgasm.
that's right.
It's not necessary to the female for conception. So what is its purpose and why more complicated in the female? Now, I should say that these 3 books that we're talking about today, they for me, they dealt with 3 areas of existence. And I have to look at my card to be sure I remember correctly. But the first book, this is what I would call the body-mind trip. And as you know, I went through a lot of experiences in those 12 years exploring female sexuality versus male sexuality. And some of it's a little graphic, but I do say in the preface that whereas fiction helps people if they read about things that they can identify with, truth really matters more. If someone knows that someone else has really had the same experience, and it's very difficult to talk about a lot of that, you know. So anyway.
Well, I just wanted to say that I appreciated how graphic and explicit and experimental. I'm going to leave it up to you if you want to add any details. But in a way, by not saying a whole lot, I think will intrigue people to want to read about it. But
well, I do say in the preface too that it's certainly not meant. There's certain things in it, and I know, how a person receives what they read depends on themselves. But it's not for the over young. I wouldn't,
Right.
It's for a really mature woman. The curious thing is, I did send one of the first drafts back. I paid a couple of $100 to Scott Meredith was the name of the company, and this was like in the early 80s, I don't remember, for an assessment of this manuscript. He was touted then as an auctioneer of books and had a big reputation. So I got back this great review. I failed to say that it was not fiction, that it was autobiographical. I failed to say that. So I sent the manuscript back. So I'm sure a man must have read it, but the things that were told me was, great scenery, you really got Mexico, it doesn't need rewriting, and this and that. But 2 things are wrong with it. The first thing that was wrong with it was I had tried to write a picaresque novel that hadn't quite come off. I had to look the word up.
yeah, tell us what that means.
Well, it means, a little bit scandalous, a little bit titillating. Whatever. And the second thing is that all of the men in it, because I don't identify them except by JC. They're like JC the Younger, the Bishop, and so forth, Brother JC.
Yeah.
That the trouble was all the men kind of blended into one, and that was exactly my point in dealing with males versus females. So I didn't feel bad about that review, but so that's, what this is about. I had another thing in here I could read that.
Okay, and then we'll close on that one and move on to the next book.
Okay.
So why don't you read
This is
last
when I went, took that time and went to the southern coast of Mexico after the divorce. Walking toward Mendoza's, I scanned the cluster of dwellings on the rise beyond the seawall and recognized the one to which I'd helped the young girl bear water. I winced in recall how naively blind one can be to one's own cupidity. I knew I was being watched as I searched out footholds along the rocks between the cove and the curious edifice that was the Mendoza restaurant. The rocky strand gave way at the building's west corner to a shallow beach, and midway across it was a weathered stone staircase. At high tide, the stairs could be gained directly from the surf, an exhilarating ascent to the restaurant's open-air level. Above it, open to the sea, was a spacious cement recess where red-painted crustacea hung decoratively in the coolness. As I waded to the base of the stone staircase, I confirmed it was Mendoza's eyes I was pretending not to feel. A quick glance upward spied him, seemingly asleep underneath a red shark's jaw in a hammock slung between the restaurant's central pillars. He gave me a gold-flushed grin as I approached. His gazes toward my bathing suit body in the distance never bothered me. The skin between neck and knees, however, was highly sensitive to the eyes of Senora Mendoza. I made certain my beach towel wrapped all before entering the recess. So anyway, Mendoza comes and serves me coffee for the last time, and this time he brought it in a sundae glass, because he knew it was my last day there. I used to go there every morning after going to the beach and writing, and stuff. And there were ants floating in it, which he didn't see, so little tiny ants, which I dug out. So anyway, I go on and say, the mien of Senora Mendoza did nothing to discourage the rumor that women of southern Mexico rule the roost. His response to his wife's rare word always was action. The dominant mother-dutiful son image was sharpened by their garb, his an irregularly stretched T-shirt and baggy trousers, hers the traditionally opulent Tijuana contrast of embroidered velvet jerkin above a trailing skirt. And then I go on. Not during all my visits was I able once to catch her eye. Today she sat near the kitchen, faced away both from me and the sea, her plait of thick gray hair and colored ribbon dangling over the back of her chair. She was not many years older than me, and I wondered, how did she deal with her sexuality? In the absence of routine marital involvement, my mind had grown familiar with its body's cycles. Age was lengthening them, but each fertile period of life's premenopausal procreational thrust, when it did occur, seemed all the more potent. I asked Mendoza to include a package of Raleigh's Confiltro and paid the tab. When will you return to our beautiful bay, he asked. Torturous question. I snapped the last of my pesos into my leather pouch. Who knows? I shook his hand and made my smile convincing. Next year, maybe, but I knew it would not be. A family was arriving as I took my leave. They gathered at a table on the lower outdoor level, 4 children under 5, bellies and ringlets, shiny with seawater. The young mother's body in its one-piece swimsuit was that of a middle-aged woman, waist a reminiscent dent, abdomen muscleless. She turned her head and peered up into the recess. Quickly I shifted my stare to the pastel haze over the bay, but the thought evoked by perception finished itself. What were the odds, I wondered, that she enjoyed an orgasm with each conception?
Yeah.
Rebirth. And that's been translated. It was written as a screenplay. I wrote that back in early 80s. But it, too, carries forth the umbrella theme, really, for this trilogy has certain subjects. The main one what I'm concerned with is conscious conception is how I termed it.
I just love this painting. It is gorgeous, just gorgeous. The movement of it, of maybe
I don't know where it is.
I don't know.
It was a miniature, and it was one. I did a long narrative poem, and it was one of the illustrations for that. But
it has
I
so
gave
much
it to
movement.
an aged woman, and I don't know what happened to it.
Oh, huh.
A lot of those things have gone. But I had a thing on population that I had written that was quite phenomenal. In 1800, the world population was 1 billion. In 1900, 1.6 billion. And you know what it is now? 7 billion. It's just phenomenal. And so one of the things that I got very concerned about, the sexuality, the conception, the fact that no nearer to being God are we than when we create another human being. And yet
it makes you feel like God. To see the birth of your own child,
oh, it does.
You feel like you're God.
You do, and you have to be God
Maybe
afterwards.
It doesn't last that long, but it is a temporary feeling at the birth.
It's just phenomenal to me that, medicine has explored all these other bodily things to such a degree, how everything works and intimate things, and yet when it comes to sexuality, it seems as if, I watched a movie last night trying to distract. It was a great movie, great story, great mystery, but the sexual scenes in it were so, I don't know, it's too much, It's like right now you hear people talking about it on the media and all these different talk shows and everything, but it's like this surface thing. It's like the subjectivity of it seems to keep us from the objectivity, and so I became very interested in that, in studying our psychophysiology, how all of us come, how what we are is flows through us, the bodily energy, how it affects psyche.
So would you say that the theme of the book is conscious conception?
Yeah,
then?
it's sort of this is a screenplay. I wrote it with young people in mind because it has music from the Grateful Dead and Pogo.
I found that so fascinating.
Yeah, it has different music in it, possible.
It was, let's see, Rolling Stones had in it.
She's like a rainbow.
Peter, Paul, and Mary, Green Sleeves. You had all kinds of music in it.
But what it does is it's making the case for birth control, but that's not outwardly said. It's a case of a young girl who establishes contact with an extraterrestrial, and eventually they manifest together and conceive a child. And then she's left on Earth to explain this thing and make her case, and it's a vehicle for exploring that.
Great imagination. It was great. Was this, I'm always so amazed that you write poetry, you write stories, you write plays. How did you know how to write a play? Writing a play is different than writing a story. You even wrote how the camera is supposed to go. Did you study writing plays?
No, because I originally wrote it as for the screen, and like there's the eternal Father, eternal Mother, eternal Son, and it's making a case for the eternal Daughter. The fourth, we've got the Trinity, but we're making a case for the quadrinity. And
that's another thing Tosca does, is she makes up her own words. Tosca has this huge vocabulary of made-up words that work. And that's one of your made-up words.
The quadrinity.
Yeah?
I don't think I made it up. It's probably not heard very often.
Oh, you don't think you made that one up?
I don't know. But anyway, so it opens, that's how it opens for me on the screen, is that there'd be the cosmos and blackness, and then you hear the eternal Mother calling for the eternal Father to meet at the mountaintop, and I saw them meeting at one of these Mayan pyramids, and the eternal Son comes. Turns out there's a call now in the cosmos for the eternal Daughter, Jonah, who has occupied these other important females on Earth. She has to come back, and she has to do another trip to further enlighten Earth, okay? So that's what the story is.
And you'd call it a futuristic play.
Yeah. I don't know why I said that exactly.
Oh.
Futuristic because...
Did you read a lot of plays And, I just was so curious as to how you did cameras and directions, and it was fascinating to me. You wrote a screenplay. You must have read other screenplays in order to write that.
No, I hadn't. I believe that what I did do when I went through to edit it is I did do some research on how you were to put plays together, and
yeah,
I think I used some of that.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
I can tell because it's very well done.
But then when I have, as you know, I did a Spanish version of it.
Yeah.
A translation. That took years. It was first worked on by a school teacher in Oaxaca, and then from her it went to an expatriate, a man in Oaxaca. He and his wife, they had a restaurant there, and then from there I hired a woman who was a well-known writer, fairly well-known writer of Spanish works, and she did a translation, but it was like too formal for me. So finally I was led to Susanna Tobert and her husband Oscar Melendrez, and they were running at that time the Stage Fest Teatro in New York of Hispanic productions, and they did the last editing, and they did a marvelous job on that Spanish translation. And the Spanish one I put into a stage. I did it for stage. It was difficult because I had to then have like a split stage. There were so many scenes in a movie, you can't do that on stage. So I did a lot of work on it.
I know that you've been to Mexico many, many times, and in a way it was a little sad how you had planned to move to Mexico. You went through a huge process to buy land, to buy the castle, right? You called it
El Castillo.
Right. You went through
post-divorce,
all this, and that was in the previous book, Journey with JC. And tell then what happened, that you moved in your castle and the land.
Right.
In Oaxaca.
In Oaxaca, when I went down for that, at the end of the divorce year, I took another week or two off without pay. And, I'd kept up a good front because it's a big thing in the family, you know how those things go, to get away. And I went down to this fishing village at the southern coast. And Ron and I had gone to Mexico a couple of times. He loved Mexico. We'd gone to Mazatlan, we'd gone to Oaxaca, we went to Belize. Yes, we did. So we had done maybe 2 or 3 trips. And so I knew how to get to this fishing village because we'd gone through there. And I stayed in this cement room down there. Well, coming back, I decided to spend one day in Oaxaca. There were a couple of sites I wanted to see, and one of them was this building that I had seen on a previous trip, and it was for sale, and that's all in the book. So I bit off this, but then I was at the end. I'd been fighting the glass ceiling, I'd been president of the labor union at work, and I'd been, out. I hadn't been given a promotion because the administration was not crazy about me.
You bought this and you left it all behind and you moved to Oaxaca.
I decided I was going to do the big escape.
Yeah. And then what happened?
And I moved in finally at the end of several months after arranging everything and selling the little tract house that had a mortgage on it, but that I got in the divorce. So, I was on a sort of a budget, but this place down there was for sale for $15,000. A huge, the building, its own well, So anyway, so I moved in and I did some improvements, as it talks about. I wasn't in there very long when then I had an option to buy. and my papers didn't come through from Mexico City, and because I'd had to leave my visa there. It's a long story, the bureaucracy and so forth. And the owner came to me and had another buyer and asked me what I was planning to do. And I wasn't about to turn over my $15,000 without my green card, essentially, is what I was waiting for. And they had told me it would come in the mail to me, and it hadn't come yet. And he had this other buyer, and so I left it.
Yeah.
I left it and came back, and I'm
How
not.
sad.
I was
Almost got to live in the castle.
Almost. Well, I was there for a while, you know.
Yeah.
A little while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to a rebirth and read us a part of the play.
What was
And
I
that
gonna read here?
our audience will know that they can read this play on your website, which we will list in the credits.
Okay. This is toward the end. Night, December 24th, an austere room, gray walls bare save a dark wood cross, glints off barred grids outside a high window. Priest and doctor sit at a table. The priest, of all nights. The doctor, I know, ludicrous, but out of deference to her condition, there wasn't much choice. People enter awkwardly through double doors and seat themselves along benches flanking the room's walls. Priest, are we to have spectators? Doctor, she insisted that the hearing, as she called it, be open. When we indicated at first that it might not be permitted, her agitation was so intense as to threaten hers and the child's welfare. She refused all food but bread and water until we agreed. The priest, her courage seems exceeded by determination. Doctor, or lunacy. Priest, must I be present? I have no medical authority. Again, she insisted. She claims the matter involves your jurisdiction more than mine. I pray the matter can be settled reasonably, that she will be released tonight to her family. Aged women in shawls also are among the spectators. Two young females whisper together. It will take an equal force to turn light back upon itself, as Einstein has already shown. Joanna appears in a doorway on the arm of her grandmother. Her swollen abdomen causes the bleak hospital dress to curve above the knees. Two other females whisper to each other. Oh, which of our sisters said, one picture is worth 1,000 words? Silly, 'twasn't a sister, 'twas a brother, as you well know. Some women touch Joanna's dress as she passes. One whispers, "Se le vaya bien." Joanna is seated on a chair at center before the table. The grandmother stations herself nearby. Then there are male whispers. The woman must be crazy. She thinks she'll be the mother of God. She thinks she is the daughter, sister, and wife of a god. Joined young females whisper louder. She says she is the wife of humankind, the daughter of humankind, a mother of humankind. Damn, you crazy people have got it all wrong. Jesus Christ, you crazy people, you still have it all wrong. The doctor taps the table. Silence ensues. The doctor, Joanna, do you know why you're here? God sent me. I mean, do you know what has placed you in this situation? Speaking the truth, such as that a just God forces devolution of ignorance, that mind cannot be separated from body, but the soul's thinking spirit can, that obeying ordination by the supreme force, mine encountered a son of same, and our matter fused for the purpose of producing a greater brilliance. Finally, that humankind can anticipate a future when we will have wrought our heart's desire to know love fully purely in mind and body. Some of the women fight expressing a cheer. However, she went on, to answer your question in short, I believe I am here because my beliefs advocate applying God-given logic toward human freedom and happiness. The older women in black shawls begin to sing softly. And here I used Carmen's Creo en Dios Todopoderoso Creador.
Oh, very good.
The doctor asks for silence. Ahem, Joanna, haven't you maintained that the conception of the child you carry was through the offices of an extraterrestrial? So it was. The priest raps for silence this time. Boy and girl waifs who had been hovering at the door push in. Whether or not I am believed, what law has been broken? The priest. None, but do you realize you could be kept here if you persist in your story? Joanna. How incongruous. The mercy offered me, recant and be free, is the same that doomed my spiritual brother in the hands of those sufficiently personally threatened by his words. The issue, dear judges, is not the conception of my child, but the fully conscious conception of all children. Bring in the children. She rises, goes to the group of waifs, takes a girl and a boy forward by the hand. Bring in the children. Let them bear witness to the word. Ask them, which is better, to be born and sleep cold in doorways with dogs and live always only at the questionable charity of humankind, or not be born at all. Let the children ask, why do not men learn from history? Can men do more than prophecy?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, let's talk about spirit in conversation.
Spirit in conversation.
And I wanted to ask you, I thought this was brilliant. And would you say that it is a conversation that you would have if you had met these philosophy masters?
Let's say it's a dialogue I would have liked to have had,
Yes.
but whether I would have
Yeah.
not been totally into, no, I don't think,
It must have been fun to imagine and write that it was, you had conversations with Freud, Jung, Hurd, and Buck.
We've gone from the mind-body trip to what then I would call the mind-consciousness trip, which is in Renacimiento. Mm-hmm. And so this is like the consciousness spirit trip. And some of the things that I wanted to address in that were, the classic male, masculine, female division of qualities, and which I think, finally we're on the way to doing, getting some real understanding about. And so the under the umbrella of this trilogy is the subject of, besides conscious conception, genderless consciousness. Mm-hmm. Somewhere along the line, I just thought, I began to think about that. I do believe that consciousness is born genderless, and that the gender it assumes is so much influenced by society's mores and family and just stereotypes, but that we all, whether male or female bodies, we all are capable of the same kinds of thoughts.
Well,
and emotions.
How much of yourself is in this book?
I guess all of it, because
Mm-hmm.
also, it begins to touch on longevity. It's as you know, it's a story about a woman that finds herself. Well, I can read the first part, which explains it, but she's an aging woman.
If you want to go ahead and read
She's
that.
an aging woman. Well, I'll read you the beginning.
Okay.
And this is where how she finds herself, having gone to bed or something. A picturesque fire glowed on the hearth. 4 men in academic robes of burnished royal blue sat in a half circle of deeply pillowed easy chairs. At center, as if a student, a woman sat in a straight-backed wooden chair. The men, all of whom she recognized, looked steadily toward her, as if waiting for her to speak. In the strange circumstances in which inexplicably she found herself, however, All she could think were words of Virgil to Alighieri's Sojourner. Better you had taken a different path? She studied the men's faces. She once had seen a photograph of Buck. The white beard seemed right. Wilhelm Reich appeared as he had in a late photograph, focus inward, his expression conveying incredulity, while Jung presented a composite of two photographs, midlife satisfied confidence and age's inevitable wonderment. Herd's expression was as in his vital years, void of emotion. Now all four visages emanated comfortable self-peace. Upon their life works, the woman had based a lifetime of self-analyses, thus concentrated a great part of her intellect. Despite their present mortal appearances, can these entities speak, she wondered? Regardless, though not knowing how she knew, her voice needed be first. Well, gentlemen, she did begin finally, might initially it be considered what would be a reasonable purpose for this encounter? I have this strong feeling that I, like you, no longer am awake in the world, but neither does it seem a dream. Herd broke the men's silence. For all of our past theorizations and wishful imaginings of various types, he waved a hand to include his companions, I venture none of us expected that. He pointed to the room's only entrance. That expertly scrolled sign inside the door, I quote, room of expiation for missing of marks. Seems we have been returned to these selves, and I use the term wonderingly, for some specific purpose. He turned to the woman, and for which we find you, so pointedly ensconced before us. Expiation, Jung furrowed his brow. Interesting word, that. And what of this, which I find standing on the mantel? Buck, having arisen, held up a piece of parchment of handsomely inscribed text. I quote, in this room, the definition assigned to expiation is, quote, putting an end to. As opposed to atonement? Jung wondered aloud. I gather so. Moreover, it appears we've been given 3 rules. 1, primary subjects include hubris, chauvinism, and patriarchism. 2, the word, quote, sin is to be understood in the New Testament original underscored Greek word, missing the mark. Ah, Jung again. That, I expect, would be in the sense of Arjuna's lesson from Shiva, correct aiming of the action, of the arrow of action. And the 3rd rule, Herd prompted, not an instruction, actually a comment. Because that, for not for ill intent, certain marks were missed by all of you in the lives that were yours, you are to explore their sources, causes, and validity. The magnified light of that completed work then can transmit through the treasury of space to aid the living.
Another fascinating part I found in Spirit in Conversation was that you put in 4 different endings. That was fascinating.
I thought maybe that would be fun to read, just the epilogue, I don't know.
And so did you do that on purpose?
Yeah.
But did you originally just have 1 ending?
No.
Oh.
No.
And you purposely thought, I'm going to put 4 possible endings.
Yes.
So if a director was to produce this as a play, they would have to pick which ending they wanted.
They would. They would.
That's so interesting. That's not done very often, is it? I've never seen it before.
I did it that way because essentially that's what I feel, I guess. It's like I don't know. You know, I've had to deal with last illnesses and death quite a bit in the last decade. And, you know, we all have to have our own, some concept of what we believe if we're lucky. And of course, that's what I've been searching for through all these writings is
Yeah.
a world, a cosmos I can accept, a faith I can accept. But insofar as a existence after bodily existence, I don't know. I don't know. So I gave the 4 possibilities.
I see.
Either one is, not 4 possibilities, but 2 possibilities. Either one is reborn the same, or one is not reborn as someone else. And I kind of make that point at the end, the 4th possible ending, where the consciousness that was the woman is born into a male child. But that's sort of subtle. That was a subtle.
Very interesting. You have a great imagination. So before we conclude, did you have anything you wanted to add to the spiriting conversation?
No, I think not. Freud comes in later, and so the things that are addressed are, again, the chauvinism that did tinge the works of the classical psychologists, and against which a lot of women's lives were matched or pitted against. So it's a vehicle for that, for sort of, and some of the topics I've already mentioned, the genderlessness of consciousness. It's a vehicle for...
Well, it was a great imagination to write a conversation that you
and
think
sort of
you'd-
trying to bring together, Freud and Jung and Reich were all of that same era and had great differences. So there's trying to bring in reconciliations too of their theories.
So you really can pretend that they were together because they're of the same generation. So
Right.
it works.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were all in Vienna at the beginning of psychoanalysis.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Huh.
And then Jung broke with Freud and it all had to do with how energy is processed through the body. And, everything for Freud was the libido and sublimation. And Jung kind of stayed away from that and went totally into the mind and the different regions of the mind and the unconscious and so forth. And then you had Wilhelm Reich, who was drummed out because he was very interested he felt that this energy that manifested itself, and we're back to sexuality, it was just one manifestation of this whole, bodily energy, and he had a whole different theory. So there were some differences between these men.
Yeah. I wanted our audience to know that they can read 2 of the books, not
2 of these.
Not Journey with JC.
No.
They can read it from your website, which we will list in the credits.
Thank you.
And I strongly encourage, which I think you're going to do, all of them, I'm hoping, will be produced in ebook form.
Well, thank you for that. I am in the process of arranging for 5 books. The 3 trilogies from each our first and second interviews. And no, not all of those. I take that back. Certain books from certain trilogies. So 5 books will be for sale as ebooks sometime in the not too distant future. And Journey with JC will be too.
Oh, good.
So
And
far,
it would be good to publicize that on your website when they are available.
Everything else on the website, the other books and short stories and things are all still up there, free downloads. And right now, everything except Journey is up there. But then some of those that are up there free will be for sale instead. So that's how it's going to work, I guess.
Thank you for joining us on WriterSpeak.
Well, it was great for me, as I said during one of the breaks, to be with you again. because it gives the writer a chance to talk, and most of the time she's back there and the domestic is out front.
Yeah.
I do a lot of that split personality thing in some of these writings. I talk about that too. Well, you know what that's like.
Yeah,
Because
well,
you fulfilled all those roles yourself.
I have.
Yes.
And it does give the writer a voice, which the writer doesn't always get a voice.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeane.
And
Gary.
It was my pleasure, and I hope you continue to write.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
WriterSpeak is produced at C Media Lab in Santa Rosa. We would certainly like to thank our sponsors, the Sonoma County Gazette and Redwood Writers, a branch of the California Writers Club. Please join us next time for another exciting episode with a local author.